Well, in the summer of 2020, me and my friend Quentin Morgan decided to get into the business of making a video game based off of the Reddit subreddit April Fool's joke known as r/place. It was an inquisitive place where members would subscribe 1 pixel of color to the entry every 5 or 6 minutes. Because of this, my friend Newfie was inspired by the great world powers to simulate a game, like in the style of Rust, which would span across an entire continent. Many continents, perhaps. It was an ambitious title, especially for someone who had never developed games before, but I took on the challenge because I was inspired and thought I could do it. Whether or not I was able to is up in the minds of those who are interested in the project. Of course, as you may have noticed, Flint is nothing like that. The project eventually spiraled into something else over many years and many introspections. So there was no need to pursue such a title, and it's in the guise of history of whether or not a title truly exists in these days. I wouldn't say there was a big challenge in making the game. It was a lot of small, tedious challenges piling up into a menagerie collection of challenges, from rendering technical problems to pathfinding for non-playable characters. Just about everything got in my way in a substantial area. A notable example of tiresome is with the slave type enemies, which fire lasers in a circle. Because I'm the farthest thing from competent at math, rotating in a full circle was something that required a level of technical finesse I had to study, which is, in my opinion, what I'd say is the hardest challenge of developing Flint. From the very start of taking on this project, I had no idea how long it would take, but I certainly didn't think it would take 5 years. It taking 5 years was purely incidental, and it was more of a causality of effect. Around that time, when I started production in 2020, June 19th, that's when I started the project. I had no idea when it would end or even if it would be properly finished. But around that time, I was dealing with multiple relationships, I was handling a job, college, a lot of things in tandem that sort of collapsed onto itself and became its whole thing that delayed the game from being projects continuously. It's more accurately to say that the game was started in June 19th, 2020 and released June 19th, 2025, exactly 5 years later. The style. Unfortunately, as many have noted, there isn't much of a style at all, and that happens to be a consequence of my own technical failings as an artist. There are plans, should Flint succeed financially, to have a redux done of sort, to hire some proper pixel artists to come through and rework the game's visuals in a way that makes it more appealing and pleasing to the eye. As for the existing visuals, they're merely a consequence of what I could produce. They simply are as they need to be, and they're efficient, as I've been told. The visual style of Flint is designed to be as efficient and as low, the maximum amount of effort required, really. The hardest thing to develop were larger sprites like the Hydra and other massive entities that required multiple pixels, big bosses, things like that. Another thing that was hard to develop was bosses with lots of animation cycles, with large pixel counts and things like that. So if a certain enemy has 19 or 20 frames, then I would have to manually animate all of them independently. So that was a very frustrating experience. Designing it, I wouldn't say. Concepting weapons was the funnest part. Concepting the runes that appear in the game and playing around with item counts and damage numbers and basically balancing. That was the funnest part of the game in relation to enemies and level design. It was mostly just a balancing act of trying to keep everything in a fair level. You don't want to have too many enemies in the wrong place, you don't want to have too many of the wrong enemies in the wrong place, and you also don't want it to be too light. The game's Balance was mostly meant to be a call and response kind of thing. If one thing did one thing, then it would descend, essentially. So if we had a big hammer that did a lot of damage, we would balance it by making it slow and making it not able to do a quick amount of damage. The upside and downsides. Another thing with level design I tried to do is pacing. There are levels of low point during the amount of the game, which allows you to relax, catch your breath, and it really makes the more high intense moments shine. A person, I believe his name was Yahtzee, once said that keeping the dial at 11 is just as boring as keeping it at 1. So because of that, we had to vary constantly between levels about what you're doing, whether it's a puzzle or a gauntlet or a boss. We always wanted to sprinkle difference in between those. And it's really easy once you understand that there is a rhythm to it. I am the only person who touched the code base of Flint. The entirety of the coding, graphic design, songs, writing, all of it was created by me. It was influenced and criticized by some of my more pertinent friends, like Aiden Ionescu, who was very helpful to inform me that the game had a balancing problem with its stamina management, which I rectified, thankfully. Outside of that, and some other nitpicks from other people who I responded to with criticism, I would say that I am responsible for everything, every single pixel, down to the last sound note. Every letter, all of it was generated by me. To answer your last question, the longest time I've ever spent, I'd say there were 8-hour sessions, 10-hour sessions, sometimes a full day was spent. Lots of burnout, I would say, in making small systems work effortlessly. That's most of what I could say. Raphael, King Invader, Nakkat, Slave Master, Halifax, Magnus, Heads and Teeth, Miranda, Luther, Ubel. So I'd say around 10 or 11 bosses altogether. My favorite of the bunch would have to be, gameplay-wise, I think I had the most fun playing with Raphael. He is one of the first bosses available in the demo. I believe he's one of the funner bosses to play with, and he's been like that for a while. I had a lot of fun working with him, especially in the earlier days. He's one of those more legacy bosses. But Ubel is also definitely a fun boss to play with. It was also fun to make. It wasn't as frustrating as I assumed he would be. He's the big bad of the story, and I set out to give him 10 different moves to perform, and generally speaking, it wasn't as hard as I imagined it would be, given the task I set upon myself. There was no inspiration. For the songs, there are certain themes that call back to reference for things to my childhood, which I have fondness for. But there were no melodies, there were no specific instruments taken that harken back to a certain time with the game or other games or media. I've had a very complicated relationship with music making. I never went to music school, I have never been taught formally, and I do not know sheet music. But I was still able to make a soundtrack that resonated with me, and hopefully resonates with all the players of the game. Open world or linear. Flint is neither. It is both linear in the sense that you are supposed to go in one direction and one direction only. However, it is also open-ended in the fact that you can go back to wherever you like to. I'd like to liken it to Conquer or some other game in that vein of area, where the entire world is open to you, but you just have to access it first. So whether that be keys, whether that be fighting enemies in one particular way, but at no point in the story are you locked off from the rest of the world unless besides a very specific scenario. Um, but no, at any point, usually you can backtrack to the very start of the game if you'd like. My favorite level would have to be the Weeping City for how intuitive and uh, it's a place where the enemy roster is fully allowed to go all out. There are certain areas where only one type of enemy is allowed to exist. The barracks, for example, only has Hell Beast. The slave master only has, well, slaves. And I believe it was the Asyla, the Underkingdom, has majority serfs. So when it came to the Weeping City, a collection of all the enemies' headquarters, I believe it's my favorite. It was my favorite to design because there were no limits on what I could include. The last question is, was it worth it? That remains to be seen. I spent a lot of time working on this project. I spent a lot of hours avoiding people that I cared about so I could work on this project and see it finished. For many years, I wrestled with myself for still having this unfinished for the last 5 years. And now I see that 5 years have passed, and right now I'm not quite sure if I have all that much to show for it. So the only question I really ask that I don't have an answer for is any of this worth it? Which I suppose we'll see in the future. I would say enjoy the game, share it with your friends. It is a fun experience, and be sure always to dare or die.